Welcome to Voices of the Valley, a captivating podcast series that brings together some of the brightest minds in the agriculture industry. Straight from the field to your living room, we explore the challenges, innovation, and triumphs in modern-day farming and provide insight for consumers who are curious about where their food comes from. Welcome to this episode of Voices in the Valley. I'm your host, Corey Lundy. Did you know that California farmers produce nearly 75% of all cantaloupes grown in the U.S.? That is about 300 million in nationwide sales. In this week's episode, we slice into everything you wanted to know about melons with Western growers Michelle Rivera and Julia Nellis and special guest Garrett Patricio, president of Westside Produce and melon grower based in Firebaugh, California. Learn about what goes on behind the scenes on a melon farm and the practices farmers are putting in place to ensure the safety of your cantaloupes as they go from farm to table. And you'll also learn some pro tips on how to tell when a melon is ripe for picking. If you're someone who knocks or taps on melons in the grocery store, we have a surprising revelation for you. Let's tune in.
So this is Garrett Patricio with Westside Produce. I'm the president. We're a melon operation based in Firebaugh, California. Also have growing operations in Yuma, Arizona, and part of an alliance with Classic Fruit in Guatemala. I'm sitting here with Michelle, communications extraordinaire from Western Growers, and the social queen, Julia. Since I'm doing the intros, they get to ask the questions.
That was flawless execution. Thank you, Garrett. Well, thanks for joining us on our podcast, Voices of the Valley, for this episode. Julia and I had the privilege of going out into the cantaloupe and honeydew fields today, watching some of the harvest, tasting some of the most delicious, juiciest, sweetest fruit imaginable, which I think I converted from cantaloupe to an absolute honeydew lover now. Never thought I would say that, but we're going to be talking about cantaloupe this episode. So, Garrett, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into cantaloupe farming?
Well, that's a long story. Basically, I was born into it. My dad helped found Westside Produce in 1993. Prior to that, his background was in accounting and was the CFO for a major farming company in the Central Valley, a very diversified farming company, but seemed to find his niche in melons. I grew up in the business working summers, whether it was in high school or college. Didn't really have a choice in college. I came home. I worked as many hours as I could get and made as much money as I could in a short summer season in order to have some liquidity when I got back to college, because it was either work in the summer or work during the school year. And if I could earn enough in the summer, I then didn't have to work during the school year. So graduated from the University of San Diego with an accounting degree with thoughts of becoming a CPA. Kind of pivoted my senior year of school and decided to go to law school, because once I started working, my folks both agreed I probably wouldn't go back to law school. So started law school and was in New York 2000 to 2002. So I was there for September 11th, pretty wild time. Transferred back to the Bay Area after 9/11 and finished up law school at Santa Clara University. Worked in San Francisco for about 3.5 years. I got back into accounting and law with a little bit of overlap. Worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers in their mergers and acquisitions group. Had primarily 3 clients, eBay, Microsoft, and Mattel down in LA, and traveled a ton. My wife and I had started talking about having a family, and with traveling 8 days out of 7, it was next to impossible to kind of envision that. So a return to the Valley became a reality when my dad approached me. His former partner had passed away, and he was looking for not only some legal help, but managerial help as well. So that was, I think, around 2005. So it's been, 18, 19 years now, quite a while. I've had lots of various roles and responsibilities here, and it's been helpful having the work experience both in, customer service and sales, as well as working in our shipping office, on our loading dock, in the receiving department. So I kind of have a pretty good idea of how the process works. The first few years I came back, I worked primarily in the field. So production, estimates for sales, kind of assisting with the harvest, and a primary focus on food safety. Melons have been a constant source of food safety concern or have kind of risen to the level of concern in food safety. There have been a series of events all over not only the U.S., but the globe related to melons and netted melons in particular. So put a lot of emphasis on our food safety programs, our sanitation programs, kind of anything that had to do with food safety, and did a complete overhaul of that, and haven't really stopped overhauling things since I've been here. So
awesome. And now that's interesting that you bring up food safety, because that was going to be one of our questions on this podcast, was considering the outbreaks that have happened in the past, how can you reassure someone that they're getting produce that is, going to be safe to consume when it hits the grocery stores?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the question with any produce item. Obviously, they're grown outdoors. They're grown in environments that are not processing environments. They're not clean rooms. You're impacted by wind, rain, animal intrusion, lots of different factors that come into play. But the reality is, in California, particularly with melons, we grow in a very dry, hot, arid climate that is not conducive to pathogenic growth and widespread issues in our fields. So we're very fortunate in that regard. Not every place around the globe has that luxury, but we do. So we know the environmental factors we're dealt. We know our risk profile, and we overlay good handling, hygiene, agricultural practices that kind of fit the best of both worlds. So we make sure that our employees are properly trained. Anybody that's working in the field is properly trained. All of our growers go through comprehensive food safety training. We make sure that we're providing the safest, most wholesome fruit every single day. We've got environmental monitoring, we've got water testing. The list kind of goes on, and we've seen the impacts of these outbreak events, and that's probably what keeps me up most at night, is worrying, are we doing the best we can? And at the end of the day, that's all you really can do, because little issues are going to pop up and you've got to be ready to deal with them. So as long as you're doing your best every single day, putting into play the best science available and utilizing that science and risk profile to make good decisions in your operations, I think I can certainly sleep a little better at night. But it's a labor of love and a source of continuous improvement. I mean, that's really what we're after. We never want to get anybody sick. We never want to injure anybody. That's never our belief or intent. And you have to make sure that your whole management team and group shares that same mindset, keeping people safe.
Also, from a consumer perspective, melons are very unique in the fact that you're not eating the exterior of the produce. You're not, some people might be eating the rind. I'm not personally, but as a consumer, I go to the grocery store and I can either buy the full melon or I can buy the more convenient option that's already cut up for me. From your perspective, is there a difference for your average mom of 4 who's going to the grocery store and is looking to buy produce for their family? Is there a difference in the nutritional value or the cleanliness? Obviously, produce in the grocery store is going to be healthy, and there are standards that need to be followed. But from a grower perspective, is there a difference in your eyes?
I think I've got to be careful with this question, because we service a lot of fresh cut operators, and they're some of our best customers and some of the biggest guys out there. So I certainly understand and appreciate the importance of those fresh cut operators. I mean, they're providing a fresh, nutritious product in a convenient clamshell that your kids can just grab and go. The unfortunate part with a lot of produce items like a melon that needs to be cut, that takes time to cut, that you then need to put in some sort of container in your refrigerator, you're talking about time that not everybody has, especially people with kids and families that are on the go. I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 9-year-old right now, and honestly, if I can get them to eat any fresh fruits and vegetables, I do. However, is
it's a win.
Yeah, it's a win, but they'll certainly grab it out of a container before they'll sit and wait for me to cut something up. Yeah. So we seem to always have cut melon in our fridge, and typically I do most of the cutting. We have cut berries. We have cut peaches during peach season. having, grown up in agriculture and knowing what's fresh, what's local, what's in our general area, I try to keep all of those items in stock. I have, for lots of friends in the grape business, so I try to keep summer grapes around. Friends in the peach or tree fruit business, that I try and keep summer tree fruit around. And then 365 days of the year, cantaloupe and honeydew. So...
Very good, very good. And now I know before I started working at Western Growers and I needed to do my grocery shopping, I would go to the grocery store. I would take for granted all the beautiful produce in front of me, just take what I needed and leave. And working here has made me really think, there are so many, and people are calling it now, invisible hands that are giving us this ability to get this produce in the store as easy as possible, and it all looks beautiful and tastes wonderful. So can you take us through the process of harvest to how the cantaloupe ends up in the store?
Sure. Cantaloupe harvest begins with what we call a crew. A crew is 20 to 21 people that are typically a family unit of some sort, cousins, brothers, relatives, some friends. But that crew is essentially a packing unit for the day. They sit and walk behind a machine and trailer where the product is picked from the ground, placed on a table. From that table, it's placed into a box. So it's really two hands that touch the product. We go back to food safety and we say, well, how many hands have touched it? What's your process look like? One person picks it, it's placed on one common packing surface, another hand grabs it and puts it in a box. That box is then palletized on a trailer by size, and that trailer is then brought into our cold storage facility. From the cold storage facility, it's forced air cooled somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. When the temperature on cantaloupes reaches 36 to 38 degrees, it's pulled from a forced air tunnel, placed in storage, and then shipped out. It's not uncommon that we ship fruit picked, packed, cooled in the same day. Maybe up to 70 or 80% of that fruit is picked, packed, and cooled the same day. So it's a labor-intensive process because it does require a lot of hands. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to recognize those hands that pick it too. And I don't know if we're going to get into immigration or talk about immigration at all, but melons have primarily been done by migrant labor. And it's important to not only recognize but appreciate those people, because we don't get the job done either in the fields, in our processing facilities, or in agriculture without those hands. So, from the immigration and labor standpoint, labor's critical. It's no surprise that things are getting more mechanized because labor is both becoming more difficult as well as more challenging, whether you're talking about, the Department of Labor or other labor-interested groups that, want to criticize everything we're doing, when in reality, we're trying to look out for our workers on an everyday basis, keep them safe, keep them healthy, keep them productive, because without a healthy, safe, and productive workforce, we don't have a crop to distribute to a customer at the end of the day.
And we don't have food to eat.
Exactly.
I do think that's a common misconception amongst just consumers who are watching from the outside, is that these people aren't treated well and they're not appreciated. But from a grower perspective, you want people to enjoy working for you and to come back season after season. So I think that what you said speaks really highly of your guys' commitment to do so.
Yeah, we're last week, just for instance, we had 20 crews working in the field. That's 400 field workers. Of those 400 people, we probably have an annual return rate of 75 to 85%. Of those foremen that were working for us, we had 4 new foremen showed up, and the others had all worked for us in prior years. I think last year we had, on average, about 15 crews, and crews kind of come and go based on production. But by and large, most of the crew foremen that have worked for us and most of the people that work for us have been here a long, long time. I mean, it says a lot about our company. It says a lot about our harvest management, our supervisors that are responsible for those people on a daily basis. I mean, they know they're going to get work. They know they're going to work the hours that we say they're going to work. We don't jerk them around in terms of, you're going to get overtime. You're not going to get overtime. You're going to work 20 hours this week. You're going to work 80 hours this week. We try and abide by a commitment to do what you say and say what you do. And at the end of the day, that's most important, because if the people trust you and the people trust your company, they'll continue to work for you and continue to be happy. So you asked a question earlier about nutrition and, what value or benefits do melons really bring? They're super high in beta-carotene, potassium, vitamin C, vitamin B. I mean, they are, I say, a superfood. Not everybody says a superfood, but they have more beta-carotene than a carrot, more potassium than a banana, and more vitamin C than an orange. So when you take the daily amounts required, on a nutrition bulletin, and you go, oh man, I just checked all 3 boxes right there by consuming a cantaloupe. I mean, I think that speaks for itself. The other interesting thing in terms of nutrition is melons are kind of viewed as an older generation fruit item. They maybe don't have the novelty of a berry or something, newer, fresher, a dragon fruit. Who knows what it is, right? But the more you introduce kids to melons, the more they really like it. I mean, I'm blown away by a lot of kids that just love melon. Oh my God, this is the best melon I've ever had. Well, do you eat a lot of melons? No, I don't eat a lot of melons, but I sure eat a lot of berries and grapes and pineapple. So, I would say to anybody listening, if you haven't had melons recently, try them. Hopefully you have a great experience. Don't get dissatisfied if you didn't have a great experience. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about, how to pick an ideal melon or the perfect melon in the store. So maybe we do that now.
So speaking of, if I'm going to the grocery store, there's the old wives' tale. If I know you mentioned it might be watermelon, but if I tap around on the exterior of the melon, I can find some sweet spots and be able to determine
I'm guilty of
if
that.
It's going to be good or not. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so unfortunately, that is not the ideal way to pick a cantaloupe. A cantaloupe in particular, over the years, has changed quite a bit. The varieties have changed. Even in my 18 years, I mean, we've gone through several different iterations of varieties, trying to find the right size, the right shape, the right color. Obviously, the right flavor is critical. And in finding the right flavor in some of these varieties, I have a couple of tricks. One is to look at the stem end. That's the area that looks like it's cut off the vine. If that stem end has netting or webbing from that cantaloupe growing up the stem end, that's usually a good indicator it's about ready to be consumed. Also, on that netting right around the stem, look for some cracking. If you find cracking around that stem, that's typically the fruit saying, hey, I'm ready to be pulled off the vine. Somebody pick me up and take me home. The exterior color has kind of changed a lot. You used to look for a real golden, yellowish color, and there are varieties that can be more green cast. They can appear a little more green, yet can be fully mature. It's largely varietal and largely dependent upon what seed company and what breeder bred that seed. All of our melon products are non-GMO. They're all traditionally bred. So it takes several years to come up and find new varieties. It is something that we consider extremely important to our responsibility as a company. Find the best varieties available, both for our customers and our consumers. Because again, it's a two-way street here. We have to appease the person buying the product, but ultimately it's most important that they appease the person that's consuming that product. So we can't lose sight of that. Even though what a consumer may view as the best piece of fruit, whether it's too small, too ugly, too green, too ripe, a buyer may not view that as the best available because they have, a certain size profile they want to meet, a certain delivery standard that they want to meet. It can't be overripe. If it's overripe, it'll spoil on the store shelves. So they're juggling all of that at once. In terms of the honeydews, I always like to look for what we call sugar trails, or it almost looks like maybe a slight bit of netting or lines on the honeydews themselves. That's typically when the fruit excretes a little bit of sugar as it's growing, whether it's through the stem end and then it runs down the melon itself. Although most retail, you'll find pretty clean honeydews all around them. They don't typically like those, what they call cosmetic defects. But if I'm picking one, I look for sugar trails.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to do that from now on.
I am too.
Yeah.
It made a huge difference. I had another question when you were talking, and it was an electric question. Do you have solar?
We do, yeah. So we put in 1.5 megawatts of solar. That was 2015. We actually had to buy the land next door to us, and the guy next door never sells anything. But when I told him what I was doing and how I needed that 5 acres to put in a solar project that would potentially, increase the likelihood we could be here 20 years from now, he was willing to sell it.
And you added in a couple boxes of melons a month, right?
Yep, of course. For life, No, the solar initiative was fabulous. I mean, obviously we received some tax credits for it, but really it was for the long-term consistent availability and pricing availability for power. Obviously, we are a major user of power here at a cold storage facility. And at the end of the day, I want to make sure I'm not only socially responsible, but fiscally responsible as well. Lots of people would say, oh my gosh, once you get done with, building that solar project, what are you going to do with all the savings you have? There are no savings. It just gets constantly reinvested in whatever you're doing next. Yeah. So it's not like I ever had this big windfall, even though my power bill was virtually nil after I put it in. All of those savings just get redeployed, whether it's into new equipment, new machinery, new people, increased salaries. Obviously, we have wage inflation, supply inflation. Everything costs more as you go down the line. So it's really not savings short term. It's just investing in your future long term.
Sure. And now in that same thread of sustainability, what kind of water usage are we talking about for cantaloupes?
That's a great question. I actually have more melons grown during periods of drought than I do during periods of surplus because melons are an extremely low water user. If you are growing melons on drip irrigation, a 80 to 90 day crop will run somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 14 inches of water. In comparison, a tomato crop will probably run double, 24. So in terms of usage, melons are a very, very low water user. And it's also a very short cycle crop. So between being a short cycle crop and requiring very little water, it's typically common during drought periods that people can grow more melons because obviously their water sources are limited and they have to make shorter term cropping decisions based on when you actually may or may not get water. So it's a good alternative. And when there's surplus water, obviously guys can grow melons as well. But we typically find during periods of drought, they're a great crop alternative.
So when we were out walking in the field, you had mentioned that melons are a pollinated crop and that pollinators are very important, bees in particular, with this crop. Could you elaborate a little bit on what it would look like if there were no bees in the field, if it was too hot in a specific season? I think there's some crazy statistic, and it's scary to think about what our produce aisle would look like in the grocery store if we did not have bees. I think we would have close to nothing that we have right now. It would look really not ideal. So could you touch on that a little bit further?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of self-pollinators out there, so we're going to be real right now. Bees come into a melon field somewhere around 30 to 50 days after the crop is planted. When that crop starts to flower, the bees begin to work. So we place hives, usually about 2 to 3 hives per acre, in and around the field. Those bees like to work. They work all of the flowers. They start the pollination process, and those pollinated flowers then turn into a small melon. It takes about 6 to 7 weeks from the time a flower is pollinated to see the results of that fruit and be ready for harvest. Without bees, we wouldn't have much of a crop. And we just came out of a period the last 10 days of extreme heat in California. We had temperatures upwards of 112, 115 degrees. During those periods of high heat, bees don't like to work. They're primarily focused on protecting the queen and keeping her cool. So I fully expect in the next 40 to 60 days, we'll start to see some bloom drop, which is when a flower wasn't pollinated and falls off the vine, or from the heat, that flower wilts and dies. So if we do see bloom drop, we'll likely see yield diminished because you won't have as many available fruits to harvest. You can potentially see a huge increase in size because with less competition on the vine, that fruit is then able to continue to grow. So the real impacts will take some time to see. And it's interesting because I've got guys calling me right now for retail ads 4 to 6 weeks from now. I can't tell you what I'm going to have 4 to 6 weeks from now. Not everybody can understand that on the buy side. Yet when you're dealing with a crop that goes from the size of your fingernail to the size of a bowling ball in 7 weeks, it's hard to tell what's going to happen in the intermediary. Is it going to be too hot? Is it going to be too cold? Were the bees working? Were the bees not working? So yeah, bees are critical to what we do. Short answer to your question, they're extremely important. The vitality and health of the hives and bees in general is critical to our crop, at least at this point. And I haven't seen or read any science lately that says we're getting anywhere near a self-pollinator in these things. So
We love bees at Western Growers. We love bees. Speaking of, for those crop that don't make it into harvest, what happens to them? What does their future look like in the field?
So if you don't make it to harvest, there's tons of nutritional and soil value in disking up that melon crop. Melons are all part of a rotation on a farm. I don't think there is really such thing as only a melon grower. If you grow melons, you typically grow tomatoes, cotton, alfalfa, hay, wheat, grains. You probably have some trees and vines too. So anytime you have a row crop, particularly melons or some of the others I mentioned, you need to properly rotate your ground. Obviously, you're looking for long-term vitality, stability, health, and nutrition of the soil. So the more you can utilize those inputs from the crop, the better the health and soil structure that field will be in the future. So we typically like to use melons as a rotation. We use some cotton, some tomatoes as well. And melons in general provide it's nutrient rich, so it's extremely good for the soil and a great rotation base for other commodities.
What are some interesting facts about cantaloupes that the average person wouldn't know?
Interesting facts about cantaloupes. Good question. One, they're an extremely low water user. They don't take a lot of water. Two, they're a very short cycle. It only takes 80 to 90 days for that crop to come to full maturity and harvest. Three, they're super high in vitamin C, vitamin B, beta-carotene, and potassium. They're excellent from a soil rotation standpoint. The average age of cantaloupe eaters is like 75. So I think changing the demographic to kids and youth is critical.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never would have realized that a lot more older people eat cantaloupe.
Melons are cool, everyone.
Yeah, they
Eat
are.
your melons.
Yes. And finally, last question. What is something you'd like the average consumer to know about farming and cantaloupes?
Farming's a challenge. It is a battle every single day. You're not in a closed air environment. You deal with weather, you deal with heat, you deal with cold, and for whatever reason, no 2 years are ever alike. You deal with pest pressure, and most of the people that are out there doing the job, either as a farmer or a farm worker, providing those fruits and vegetables for you on an everyday basis, it takes a ton of work. It takes a ton of effort. It takes a ton of time. But most importantly, it takes a ton of passion. People have to be passionate about growing a food item that is critical for the health and wellness of the rest of the country.
Well said. Well said. We do have a new guest. Garrett, if you'd like to introduce our guest.
So this guest is my son, Bryce. He just came into the office to visit, so we figured we'd ask him a couple questions. You ready to answer some questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I have 2 questions for you. 1, what do you think your dad's job title is?
He's a farmer.
Excellent. Excellent. And 2, what is your favorite type of melon that he brings home for you?
Cantaloupe.
Cantaloupe. Good choice.
You don't like honeydew?
What about honeydew?
Not
No?
that much.
What about
gotta-
watermelon?
Well, you don't really bring home watermelon that much.
That's true. But you like the
So-
cantaloupes?
Yeah.
What do you
I
like
them
about
the
'em?
most? The flavor.
The flavor profile.
good.
It's incredible. Well, thank you.
Thanks
this is
for
your
joining
first
us.
public appearance. You're going to be famous.
Yay.
Yay.
Thanks, guys.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Garrett. This was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Hope you guys learned a few things in the process, too.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's Voices of the Valley. Today's episode was produced by Michelle Rivera. We'd like to give a huge thanks to Garrett for joining us this week. In our next episode of Voices of the Valley, we'll be talking to Vincent Ricciuti from Enzo Olive Oil Company as we pour over everything you need to know about this timeless culinary staple. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Find and follow us on X at our handle at Western Growers. You can also find us on Instagram at Western_Growers. We'll be selecting a few lucky recipients to receive our coveted Western Growers branded Stanley mug. That wraps up this week's Voices of the Valley. I'm Corey Lundy, signing off. Thanks for tuning in to Voices of the Valley, a Western Growers production, produced by Corey Lundy, Ann Donahue, Michelle Rivera, Kara Timmons, and Julia Nellis. As always, we'd like to give a special shout out to our guest for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to catch our future episodes, and we invite you to follow us on social media to continue the conversation.